Recently, a major investigation exposed 30 doctors across India accepting high-end hospitality and travel perks from pharmaceutical companies. In the medical industry, these arrangements are known as junkets, all expenses paid flights, luxury hotel stays, and high-value gifts funded by drug manufacturers. This specific dataset isn't isolated to one rogue hospital. It spans 9 distinct state jurisdictions. Accepting these gifts does not operate in a legal gray area. It is a direct, explicit violation of established medical codes. The rule is written in black and white in Section 6.8 of the Indian Medical Council Regulations from 2002. The mandated punishment for this violation is severe. A practitioner caught accepting pharmaceutical bribes faces the temporary or permanent removal of their name from the medical register. Yet, despite clear, documented evidence, the respective state medical councils have failed to suspend a single license or take any meaningful punitive action against these doctors. This failure to act across multiple states reveals a structural paralysis in India's decentralized medical regulatory framework. To understand why the system fails, we first need to look at why pharmaceutical companies spend so heavily on sponsoring medical professionals. The goal is prescription bias. Whether consciously or subconsciously, luxury perks alter a doctor's prescribing habits in favor of the sponsor's products. Pharmaceutical companies do not classify these trips under research and development. They are explicitly booked as corporate marketing expenses. These massive marketing budgets are recouped by factoring the expense directly into the maximum retail price of the drugs. This actively suppresses cheaper, unbranded generic medicines, as heavily marketed, branded alternatives take priority on the prescription pad. In India, the vast majority of healthcare expenditure is paid entirely out of pocket by the average citizen, without the buffer of comprehensive insurance. The doctor's free trip is paid for at the pharmacy counter. The junket functions as a hidden tax levied directly on the sick. When regulators fail to police these marketing practices, a common corporate tactic becomes a direct threat to affordable public healthcare. This brings us to the structure of medical oversight. At the apex sits the National Medical Commission, the national regulatory body for medical professionals in India. But the NMC mostly sets national guidelines. Actual disciplinary enforcement is delegated downward to the state medical councils. This creates a structural bottleneck. Any complaint against a doctor must first be filed and processed at this local state level. Here is where the framework breaks down. State medical councils are largely comprised of elected local practitioners. This introduces an immediate conflict of interest. Council members are tasked with policing the very peers whose votes keep them in power. This electoral dynamic breeds a culture of professional protectionism. Strict disciplinary actions like deregistration become political liabilities, leading to complaints disintegrating before they are processed. This local gridlock explains why those 30 doctors across 9 states faced almost zero consequences. An oversight system reliant entirely on peer-elected bodies naturally prioritizes professional solidarity over patient protection. That covers the medical side of the equation. Now we look at the pharmaceutical companies providing the perks. The specific framework designed to govern these companies is called the Uniform Code for Pharmaceutical Marketing Practices, or UCPMP. The fatal flaw in the UCPMP framework is written on the cover. It was designed as a voluntary code of conduct. Because the code is voluntary, the government lacks the statutory authority to impose severe financial penalties on violating companies. This creates an asymmetry in the law. Doctors theoretically face professional ruin for accepting a bribe, while the pharmaceutical companies face zero legal jeopardy for offering it. Protected by this loophole, pharmaceutical companies can continue to offer lavish junkets with complete impunity. Industry associations argue that self-regulation is sufficient. The 30-doctor scandal is proof that self-regulation fails in practice. A regulatory system that only threatens the receiver of a bribe while providing legal cover to the giver is broken by design. If honor codes fail, how do other legal systems neutralize the alliance between pharmaceutical wealth and medical prescriptions? In the United States, the response to this exact problem is the Physician Payment Sunshine Act. The core mechanism of the Sunshine Act is mandatory public disclosure. All financial value transfers from pharma to doctors go into a public, searchable letter. A value transfer is comprehensive. It includes consulting fees, travel expenses, research grants, and even the cost of a small meal. This creates a powerful behavioral shift. Doctors are significantly less likely to accept questionable perks when their patients can easily search their financial ties online. The Sunshine Act relies on mandatory transparency, which stands in direct contrast to India's opaque, closed-door peer review system. Transparency does not replace the need for punishment, but it acts as a highly effective preventative deterrent. These transparency laws prove that sunlight is the most effective regulatory tool, exposing the inadequacy of relying on professional honor. Based on the evidence of the 30 doctors, the era of medical and pharmaceutical self-regulation in India has to end. The first solution is the immediate conversion of the UCPMP from a voluntary code to a strict statutory law. Statutory backing gives the government the authority to levy crippling financial penalties directly on the pharmaceutical companies initiating the bribes. The second solution requires a structural reform of the disciplinary appellate process to bypass localized corruption. This can be achieved through a strict timeline mechanism. If a state medical council fails to initiate action on a complaint within 60 days, jurisdiction must automatically escalate. At that point, the National Medical Commission must be granted independent authority to intervene, investigate, and penalize doctors when state bodies intentionally paralyze the process. Combining statutory penalties for the pharmaceutical industry with federal override powers for the NMC successfully neutralizes the current gridlock. The final solution is the implementation of an Indian equivalent to the Sunshine Act. India needs a centralized, government-mandated public database tracking every rupee transferred from pharmaceutical entities to medical practitioners. Patients have a fundamental right to know if their prescribed treatment is being influenced by corporate hospitality. The medical profession is an institution built entirely on patient trust. Unchecked pharmaceutical influence slowly erodes that foundational trust, reducing patients to mere consumers of aggressively marketed products. The investigation into these 30 doctors exposed the specific legal and structural vulnerabilities created by a voluntary UCMP and compromised state councils. Until these structural loopholes are closed with statutory law and mandatory transparency, medical ethics in India will remain subordinate to commercial interests.